Admiral Kate Sullivan stood at the viewport of the Earth Defense Station, watching the blue marble of her homeworld turn slowly below. The sight should have brought her peace, but today it only reminded her of what they stood to lose. Behind her, the communication officer cleared his throat nervously. The message from the Galactic Council had arrived 3 hours ago, and Sullivan had read it 17 times. Each reading made the words no less shocking. Earth had 72 hours to surrender all advanced technology developed in the past decade, or face complete blockade and technological suppression. The Council claimed their innovations violated something called the Primitive Species Protection Act. Sullivan turned away from the viewport and walked to the conference room where her senior staff waited. Dr. Marcus Webb sat at the far end of the table, his usually calm face showing deep worry lines. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Clark was reviewing data on his tablet, his jaw set in the determined expression she knew meant he had found something important. Ambassador Helen Torres sat quietly, still in shock from delivering the Council's ultimatum. The Admiral took her seat at the head of the table and looked at each of them in turn. These people had served with her for years, through first contact with the aliens and humanity's difficult integration into galactic society. Now they faced the greatest crisis in human history. Dr. Webb spoke first, his voice tight with controlled anger. He had spent the last 2 hours pulling classified files, and what he found painted a disturbing picture. For 37 years, humans had been systematically excluded from Council scientific exchanges. Every breakthrough humanity made was quietly stolen and distributed among other species without credit or compensation. The quantum drive, technology the Council now demanded they surrender, was entirely human innovation. Earth scientists had developed it from scratch, working with limited resources and no outside help. The adaptive AI networks that managed their ships and stations were also purely human creations, born from necessity when the Council refused to share their automation technology. Lieutenant Commander Clark set down his tablet and looked directly at Sullivan. His intelligence report suggested the ultimatum was not what it seemed. Council fleet movements over the past month indicated they were positioning forces for something much larger than a simple technology seizure. 3 separate armadas had been quietly moving toward the outer edges of human space. Ambassador Torres finally found her voice, explaining what she had witnessed during the formal delivery of the ultimatum. The Council chamber had been filled with representatives from 12 alien species, but the human delegation had been excluded from the proceedings. She was simply called in to receive their decision, not to participate in any discussion or negotiation. The Council speaker, a towering reptilian creature named Zethkar from the Vorthan Empire, had delivered the ultimatum with barely concealed contempt. He spoke of human arrogance and the need to maintain galactic stability. But Torres noticed something else in his manner: fear. The Council was afraid of what humanity might become if left unchecked. Sullivan listened to each report in silence, her military mind already working through possibilities and consequences. Earth's defensive capabilities were limited compared to the vast fleets of the Council. Humanity had 48 ships, mostly converted exploration vessels hastily fitted with weapons. The Council could field thousands of purpose-built warships from a dozen different species, but Sullivan had not reached her position by accepting impossible odds. She had learned long ago that superior numbers and technology could be overcome by superior tactics and determination. The Council expected humanity to submit meekly, as they had for nearly 4 decades. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Dr. Webb pulled up holographic displays showing the quantum drive specifications and AI network architectures. These technologies represented not just military advantages, but the foundation of human independence. Without them, Earth would remain forever dependent on Council technology, forever subject to their arbitrary rules and restrictions. The quantum drives allowed human ships to move faster and more efficiently than anything in the Council fleets. More importantly, they were unpredictable in ways that confused alien tactical computers. Human pilots could change course mid-jump, something that traditional jump drives made impossible. This gave them a crucial advantage in any space engagement. The adaptive AI networks were even more revolutionary. Unlike the rigid programming used by most alien species, human AIs could learn and evolve in real time. They adapted to new situations, found creative solutions to unexpected problems, and most importantly, they were nearly impossible for outside forces to hack or subvert. Lieutenant Commander Clark presented his intelligence analysis, showing how the Council's own communication networks had significant vulnerabilities. The various alien species used different protocols and languages, requiring constant translation through central servers. During times of stress or conflict, these systems often failed, leading to coordination problems between different fleets. Ambassador Torres raised the possibility of negotiation, but her heart was not in the suggestion. She had seen the faces of the Council representatives when the ultimatum was delivered. This was not a negotiating position. It was a final demand backed by overwhelming force. The Council had decided that humanity had become too dangerous to remain independent. Sullivan stood and walked to the wall display, showing the positions of human ships throughout the solar system. Earth's fleet was small but well-trained, crewed by people who understood what they were fighting for. The Council's forces were vast but had never faced serious resistance from anyone. They had grown comfortable with automatic obedience from the species under their control. The Admiral made her decision. Humanity would not surrender the technologies that guaranteed their independence. They would not submit to a system that treated them as inferiors and thieves. If the Council wanted Earth's innovations, they would have to take them by force. And Sullivan intended to make that as difficult and costly as possible. She activated the emergency communication system, sending coded messages to every human ship, station, and colony. Protocol 7 was now in effect. Every available vessel was to return to Earth immediately. Every defensive system was to be activated and prepared for combat. Every human settlement was to begin evacuation procedures. Dr. Webb began coordinating with the research stations, ensuring that critical data was backed up and distributed across multiple locations. If Earth fell, the knowledge needed to rebuild human civilization would survive. Lieutenant Commander Clark started implementing intelligence protocols, preparing to monitor Council movements and communications. Ambassador Torres contacted the few alien species who had shown sympathy toward humanity over the years. Perhaps some could be convinced to remain neutral in the coming conflict. Perhaps others might even be willing to help, if they believed Earth could actually succeed in resisting the Council's demands. As the hours passed and reports came in from across human space, Sullivan felt a familiar calm settle over her. This was what she had trained for her entire career. The impossible battle, the desperate odds, the moment when everything human civilization had built hung in the balance. She had no illusions about their chances, but she also had no doubts about their cause. The Council had made a critical error in their calculations. They saw humanity as just another primitive species to be controlled and exploited. They had forgotten the most important lesson of human history, that free people, fighting for their homes and their future, could accomplish things that seemed impossible to those who had never known real freedom. Sullivan looked out at the stars one more time, knowing that in less than 69 hours, those stars would be filled with enemy ships. The Galactic Council expected Earth to surrender without a fight. They were about to discover just how badly they had misjudged the human spirit. The Council enforcement fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system exactly 72 hours after delivering their ultimatum. Fleet Marshal Quindar stood on the bridge of his flagship, a massive crystalline vessel that sparkled like a jewel against the black of space. Around him, 300 ships from 7 different alien species formed the largest armada ever assembled by the Galactic Council. Quindar was a member of the Nixari race, beings whose bodies were composed of living crystal that could think and reason. His kind had served as military commanders for the Council for over 1,000 years, their logical minds perfectly suited to large-scale tactical planning. He had never faced a species that refused to surrender when faced with such overwhelming force. The human response to his arrival was not what he expected. Instead of surrender transmissions, his communications officers reported that Earth's defensive fleet was forming up near the planet. 48 small ships, most of them obviously converted civilian vessels, were preparing to engage his armada. Quindar found this behavior puzzling and slightly insulting. Admiral Sullivan watched the enemy fleet from the bridge of her flagship, the Defiance. The converted exploration vessel was barely 200 meters long, dwarfed by the smallest ships in the Council armada. But size was not everything, and Sullivan had spent the last 3 days preparing a strategy, that would use the enemy's confidence against them. Commander Lisa Hayes had worked around the clock to develop Protocol 7, a tactical approach that took advantage of humanity's greatest assets: adaptability and manufacturing speed. While the Council fleet traveled toward Earth, human shipyards had been working at maximum capacity, producing thousands of small automated combat drones. Each drone was only 3 meters long and carried a single weapon system, but they were equipped with the quantum drives that the Council demanded humanity surrender. This made them faster and more maneuverable than anything in the enemy fleet. More importantly, they were controlled by adaptive AI networks that could learn and evolve during combat. Dr. Webb worked frantically aboard the research vessel Discovery, trying to hack into Council communication networks before the battle began. His team had been monitoring alien transmissions for weeks, and they had discovered something remarkable about the enemy fleet. Despite their apparent unity, the different species had serious coordination problems. The Vorthan Empire ships used completely different communication protocols than the crystalline Nexari vessels. The insectoid Kethamori warriors preferred direct visual signals, while the gaseous beings of the ethereal collective communicated through electromagnetic pulses. All of these had to be translated through Central Council servers, creating delays and confusion. Fleet Marshal Quindar opened communications with the human fleet, expecting to receive their formal surrender. Instead, Admiral Sullivan appeared on his screen, her expression calm and determined. She informed him that Earth rejected the Council's ultimatum and would defend itself against any aggression. Quindar was so surprised by this response that he almost forgot to order his fleet to attack. The battle began with a massive barrage from the Council ships, their energy weapons creating a light show visible from Earth's surface. But the human fleet did not respond in kind. Instead, they released their swarms of combat drones, thousands of tiny ships that scattered in all directions like a cloud of angry insects. Captain Sam Mitchell commanded the destroyer Valiant, one of the few purpose-built warships in the human fleet. While the drones engaged the enemy's attention, he implemented the psychological warfare tactics that Lieutenant Commander Clark had developed. His communications officer began broadcasting fake orders in various alien languages. The false transmissions were carefully crafted to exploit the cultural tensions between different Council species. Messages that appeared to come from Vorthon command ships ordered Kethmori vessels to withdraw from combat. Signals that seemed to originate from Nexari flagships commanded ethereal collective units to change their attack patterns. Confusion spread through the Council fleet as different species began receiving contradictory orders. The central translation servers became overloaded trying to process the flood of communications, causing even more delays and misunderstandings. Ships that should have been coordinating their attacks instead found themselves working at cross purposes. Meanwhile, the human drones were having an effect far beyond their size. The Council's defensive systems were designed to handle large, predictable targets attacking in formation. The swarms of tiny, fast-moving ships using seemingly random attack patterns overwhelmed their targeting computers and shield generators. Lieutenant Commander Clark made a crucial discovery while monitoring the battle. The Council's sophisticated shield technology, which should have made their ships nearly invulnerable, had a fatal weakness. The shields were programmed to adapt to incoming attacks, but they needed time to analyze and respond to new threat patterns. The human adaptive AI networks controlling the drones learned this weakness within minutes of engaging the enemy. They began rapidly changing their attack patterns, switching between different weapon frequencies and approach vectors faster than the Council shields could adapt. What should have been impenetrable defenses became increasingly vulnerable. Dr. Webb's hacking efforts finally succeeded in penetrating the Council's main communication network. He immediately began feeding false information into their tactical computers, showing human ships in wrong positions and reporting damage that did not exist. The enemy commanders found themselves fighting ghosts while real threats approached undetected. Fleet Marshal Quindar watched in growing alarm as his carefully planned attack dissolved into chaos. His massive fleet was being outmaneuvered by an enemy a fraction of their size. 3 of his dreadnoughts had already suffered critical damage from swarms of tiny, human ships that his weapons could barely target. The crystalline commander tried to regain control of the battle by ordering his fleet to concentrate their fire on the human capital ships. But the adaptive AI networks had learned to predict this tactic as well. The human vessels used their quantum drives to make impossible course changes, appearing to be in one location while actually attacking from another. Admiral Sullivan coordinated the battle from the Defiance, watching as her impossible strategy actually began to work. The Council fleet, despite its massive advantage in numbers and firepower, was losing the engagement. Their rigid tactics and poor coordination made them vulnerable to the chaotic, adaptive approach that humanity had developed. Captain Mitchell's psychological warfare campaign reached its peak when he managed to convince a group of Kethmori ships that they were under attack by their Nexari allies. The warrior insects, known for their quick tempers and aggressive nature, immediately began firing on the crystalline vessels, adding friendly fire to the chaos already consuming the Council fleet. The turning point came when a coordinated drone attack overwhelmed the shields of the Vorten command ship. The massive vessel, which had seemed invincible just hours before, suffered a catastrophic explosion that lit up the entire battle zone. The psychological impact on the Council forces was immediate and devastating. 2 more Council dreadnoughts fell to the relentless drone swarms, their sophisticated defenses useless against enemies that refused to follow predictable patterns. The alien crews, who had never faced serious resistance in their military careers, began to panic as their supposedly superior technology failed them. Fleet Marshal Quindar found himself in a position no Council commander had faced in over a century. His fleet was being defeated by a supposedly primitive enemy. His logical mind calculated the odds and reached an inescapable conclusion. If the battle continued, he would lose even more ships to an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with every passing moment. The crystalline commander made the most difficult decision of his career. He ordered a general retreat, pulling his remaining ships back to the edge of the solar system. The Council fleet, which had arrived with absolute confidence in their victory, limped away from Earth, having lost over 40 vessels to an enemy they had expected to surrender without a fight. Admiral Sullivan watched the enemy fleet withdraw and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Humanity had won its first victory against the Galactic Council, proving that superior numbers and technology could be overcome by superior tactics and determination. But she also knew this was only the beginning. The Council would return with larger fleets and better strategies. The real war was just starting. News of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy faster than the Council could contain it. On dozens of worlds, oppressed species who had suffered under Council rule for centuries suddenly saw hope. If the primitive humans could defeat a Council armada, perhaps freedom was possible for others as well. Rebellions began erupting on planets that had been peaceful for generations. The Council's response was swift and brutal. They declared humanity a rogue species and called for total war, mobilizing forces from across their territory. The fearsome Kethmori warrior clans volunteered their entire fleet, eager for revenge against the species that had humiliated them. The technologically advanced Ethereal Collective offered their most sophisticated weapons. Admiral Sullivan knew that Earth could not survive a prolonged war of attrition against the combined might of the galactic community. Their victory had been won through surprise and superior tactics, but the Council would not make the same mistakes twice. Humanity needed allies, and they needed to change the nature of the conflict entirely. The Admiral authorized Operation Prometheus, named after the ancient human myth of stealing fire from the gods. Instead of hoarding their technological advantages, humanity would share them with rebel species throughout the galaxy. Dr. Webb took charge of the technical aspects, working with teams of scientists to develop simplified versions of human technology. The quantum drive systems were redesigned to work with alien manufacturing capabilities. Dr. Rachel Stone led a team that created modular components that could be assembled by species with completely different industrial bases. The adaptive AI networks were simplified into basic learning algorithms that could run on primitive computer systems. Dr. Peter Kim focused on communication technology, developing universal translators that could work between any 2 species without requiring Council translation servers. This technology alone was revolutionary, allowing rebel groups to coordinate directly without fear of Council interception or manipulation. Commander Lisa Hayes drew the dangerous assignment of making contact with rebel movements behind enemy lines. Her ship, the cruiser Independence, had been fitted with experimental stealth technology based on human quantum principles. The vessel could bend space around itself, becoming effectively invisible to most alien sensor systems. Hayes's first contact was with the Ceylani, a plant-like species that had been enslaved by the Council for over 500 years. The Ceylani possessed unique biological capabilities, able to grow and shape organic materials in ways that amazed human scientists. They could literally grow the components needed for human technology instead of manufacturing them. The meeting took place in the deep forests of Ceylani Prime, hidden beneath massive trees that stretched kilometers into the sky. The plant beings communicated through chemical signals and electrical impulses that human translators could barely interpret. But the desire for freedom needed no translation. The Ceylani were fascinated by human biotechnology and quickly learned to integrate organic components with quantum drive systems. Within weeks, they were producing bioships that could grow new capabilities and adapt to changing conditions. These vessels were completely unlike anything the Council had ever encountered. Hayes's next contact was with the depths, aquatic beings who lived in the underground oceans of dozens of water-rich worlds. The depths had always remained neutral in galactic conflicts, preferring to hide in their underwater cities rather than involve themselves in surface politics. But Council mining operations were poisoning their oceans. The aquatic aliens possessed incredible intelligence networks, with communication systems that spanned entire star systems through underground water channels. They could provide detailed information about Council fleet movements, supply lines, and military installations. In exchange for human technology, they offered to become the eyes and ears of the rebellion. Captain Jake Foster commanded the stealth ship Shadow, tasked with establishing secure communication networks between rebel cells. His vessel used quantum entanglement technology to create instantaneous communication links that the Council could neither detect nor intercept. For the first time in galactic history, resistance movements could coordinate across multiple star systems. Foster's work was delicate and dangerous, requiring him to visit dozens of worlds without being detected by Council security forces. He worked with species that had never cooperated before, helping them overcome centuries of mistrust and cultural differences. The common enemy and shared human technology gave them reasons to work together. The rebellion grew faster than anyone had expected. Each successful operation inspired more species to join the cause. Human tactical manuals were translated into hundreds of alien languages. Quantum drive technology appeared on ships throughout Council space. Adaptive AI networks began managing rebel logistics and communications. The Council found itself fighting a war unlike anything in their history. Every time they destroyed one rebel cell, two more appeared to take its place. Their rigid, hierarchical military structure was completely unprepared for the fluid, adaptive tactics that human advisors taught the resistance movements. Lieutenant Commander Clark coordinated intelligence operations from Earth, analyzing reports from across the galaxy to identify the most effective targets. He discovered that the Council's greatest weakness was their dependence on centralized command and control systems. Every decision had to be approved by committees representing multiple species. Clark developed strategies that exploited this weakness, encouraging rebel groups to attack multiple targets simultaneously. The Council's command structure could not process information and make decisions fast enough to respond effectively. They were always reacting to the last attack while new ones were already being planned. Dr. Webb made a breakthrough discovery while analyzing captured Council technology. The various alien species had been using incompatible systems for thousands of years, held together only by massive translation and integration networks. These networks were sophisticated but fragile, vulnerable to the right kind of interference. Working with brilliant engineer Dr. Amy Carter, Webb developed what they called a universal translation virus. It was designed to integrate harmlessly into Council communication networks, but once in place it would begin creating subtle errors in translation. Orders would be misunderstood, reports would be corrupted, and coordination would gradually break down. The virus was distributed through the rebel networks, planted in Council systems by sympathetic aliens who had access to communication hubs. It spread slowly and carefully, designed to avoid detection until it had infected the entire galactic communication infrastructure. Admiral Sullivan watched the progress reports with growing satisfaction. What had begun as humanity's desperate fight for survival was becoming a galaxy-wide revolution. Species that had never imagined freedom were now fighting side by side against their oppressors. The rigid order that had dominated the galaxy for millennia was finally beginning to crack. But Sullivan also knew that the Council would not accept defeat easily. They were already mobilizing their core fleets, bringing in forces from the oldest and most powerful member species. The Ethereal Collective was rumored to be deploying weapons that could destroy entire star systems. The war was about to enter its most dangerous phase. The Rebel Alliance was strong but still fragmented, held together more by shared hatred of the Council than by genuine unity. Different species had different goals and different ideas about what should replace the current system. Humanity would need to prove that their vision of galactic democracy could actually work. As reports came in of successful operations across dozens of star systems, Sullivan prepared for the next phase of the war. The Council was wounded but not defeated. They would strike back with everything they had, and the rebels would need to be ready. The galaxy's future hung in the balance, and humanity found itself at the center of the greatest conflict in galactic history. The Galactic Council chamber on the capital world of Zentari had not seen such chaos in over 1,000 years. Representatives from 12 species shouted at each other in their native languages, while translation systems struggled to keep up. 3 member species had already withdrawn their fleets to protect their own territories from rebellion, leaving the remaining Council forces dangerously overextended. Speaker Zethkar stood at the center of the Great Chamber, his reptilian features showing the strain of trying to hold the alliance together. The Vorthon Empire had lost more ships to human-inspired rebels in the past month than in the previous century of conflicts. Ancient rivalries that had been suppressed for millennia were beginning to resurface. The crystalline Nexari blamed the militaristic Kethmori for underestimating human capabilities. The Kethmori accused the Nexari of cowardice for retreating from battle. The Ethereal Collective questioned whether the Council's structure was fundamentally flawed if it could be defeated by primitive rebels using stolen technology. Meanwhile, Dr. Marcus Webb worked feverishly in his laboratory aboard the research vessel Discovery, making the most important discovery of his career. The captured Council communication equipment revealed something extraordinary about how the galactic government actually functioned. The different species had never truly been unified. For thousands of years, each species had maintained its own communication protocols, its own data formats, and its own command structures. The only thing that held them together was a massive network of translation servers and integration systems. Every order, every report, every coordination effort had to pass through these central computers. Working with Dr. Amy Carter, Webb refined the translation virus they had developed months earlier. The new version was far more sophisticated, designed to create cascading failures throughout the Council's entire communication infrastructure. Once activated, it would make coordination between different species nearly impossible. The virus needed to be planted directly into the central communication hub at Station Omega, a massive facility located at the heart of Council space. The station was heavily defended and constantly monitored, making any direct assault impossible. It would require a stealth mission using captured Council technology. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Clark volunteered to lead the mission, taking a small team aboard a captured Vorthon vessel. The ship had been provided by Captain Nina Cross, a Vorthon officer who had defected to the human cause after witnessing Council atrocities against civilian populations. Cross had once been a loyal Council officer, believing in the system that promised peace and stability throughout the galaxy, but she had gradually realized that the Council's peace came at the cost of freedom for billions of beings. Her defection had provided humanity with invaluable intelligence about Council operations and technology. The captured Vorthon ship, renamed Shadow Walker, approached Station Omega using legitimate identification codes that Cross had provided. The station's security systems recognized the vessel as a regular supply transport, allowing it to dock without triggering alarms. Clark and his team wore Vorthon environmental suits to disguise their human appearance. Station Omega was a marvel of alien engineering, a crystalline structure over 50 kilometers across that housed the most sophisticated communication equipment in the galaxy. Thousands of aliens from dozens of species worked to maintain the systems that kept the Council functioning. The facility processed trillions of messages every day. Clark's team made their way through the station's corridors, using intelligence provided by the rebel network to avoid the most heavily monitored areas. They posed as maintenance workers, carrying equipment cases that actually contained the components needed to deploy Webb's virus into the central processing cores. The insertion process required physical access to the main quantum processors, located deep within the station's most secure section. Clark's team had to bypass multiple security checkpoints, using forged authorization codes and careful timing to avoid detection. Each moment increased the risk of discovery. As they worked to plant the virus, alarms suddenly began sounding throughout the station. Clark's heart raced, thinking they had been discovered, but the emergency was unrelated to their mission. A rebel attack on a nearby Council shipyard had triggered a station-wide alert, providing perfect cover for their activities. With the virus successfully planted in the core systems, Clark's team began their careful withdrawal from the station. The malicious code was designed to remain dormant for several hours, giving them time to escape before it activated. Once it began spreading, there would be no stopping the cascade of communication failures. Admiral Sullivan received confirmation of the mission's success while coordinating the largest human offensive of the war. Rebel fleets from across the galaxy had gathered for a coordinated strike against Council forces at Alpha Centauri, humanity's closest neighbor star system. The timing had to be perfect. The combined Rebel fleet was a sight to behold. Over 1,000 ships of dozens of different designs united under human tactical command. Ceylani bioships grew new weapon systems as they traveled. Depths vessels used water-based propulsion systems that confused Council sensors. Human ships darted between them like shepherds guiding a vast flock. The Council's main battle group at Alpha Centauri represented the core of their remaining military power. Fleet Marshal Quindar had learned from his earlier defeat and deployed his forces in a defensive formation designed to counter human drone tactics. His ships were ready for the kind of chaotic battle that had cost him so dearly before. But the rebels were not planning to repeat their earlier tactics. This time they had overwhelming numbers and the element of surprise. More importantly, they had a secret weapon that would activate at the precise moment the battle began. Webb's virus was set to trigger just as the first shots were fired. The battle commenced with the largest exchange of fire in galactic history. Energy beams and projectile weapons lit up the space between the two fleets like a second sun. But within minutes, something began to go wrong with the Council forces. Their coordination started breaking down as communication systems failed. Orders from Nexari command ships arrived at Kethmori vessels as incomprehensible static. Ethereal collective units received battle plans intended for completely different species. The careful formation that Quindar had arranged began to dissolve as individual ships lost contact with their commanders. Commander Scott Barnes led a squadron of hybrid human Ceylani bioships in a breakthrough attack against the confused Council lines. The living vessels adapted to enemy fire patterns in real time, growing new armor configurations and weapon systems as needed. They moved through the Council formation like predators hunting isolated prey. Fleet Marshal Quindar watched his carefully planned defense crumble as his own communication systems turned against him. Reports from different parts of his fleet contradicted each other. Tactical displays showed enemy positions that changed every few seconds. He realized that the rebels had somehow corrupted his entire command network. The crystalline commander made a desperate attempt to coordinate his forces using direct visual signals, but the diverse species in his fleet used completely different signaling systems. What meant attack to a Nexari ship meant retreat to a Kethmori vessel. The breakdown in communication became complete and irreversible. Admiral Sullivan pressed her advantage, directing the rebel fleet to exploit every weakness in the Council formation. The diversity that had once made the Council strong now became their greatest liability. Without their translation systems, the different species could not work together effectively. As Council ships began surrendering or fleeing the battle zone, Fleet Marshal Quindar found himself completely isolated. His flagship, surrounded by rebel vessels and unable to communicate with his own forces, finally transmitted a general surrender signal. The symbol of Council military might had been defeated by the very diversity it had tried to control. The victory at Alpha Centauri marked the effective end of Council military resistance. With their communication networks corrupted and their fleets scattered, the remaining Council forces could no longer coordinate large-scale operations. The rebellion had become a revolution, and the old galactic order was finally beginning to collapse under its own contradictions. The great council chamber on Zentari stood empty for the first time in over 2,000 years. Speaker Zethkar walked slowly through the abandoned halls where representatives from across the galaxy had once gathered to make decisions affecting trillions of beings. The silence was deafening after centuries of constant debate and discussion. Rebellion had spread to hundreds of worlds following the victory at Alpha Centauri. Without their communication networks to coordinate responses, Council forces found themselves fighting dozens of separate wars they could not win. One by one, member species began withdrawing from the Alliance to protect their own territories. Zethkar had spent his entire life believing in the Council system, convinced that strong central authority was necessary to maintain peace among the galaxy's diverse species. Now he watched that system collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. The rebellion had exposed fundamental flaws that could no longer be ignored. Admiral Sullivan received the communication request on a secure channel, transmitted through the quantum networks that Captain Foster had established throughout Rebel space. The Vorthon leader was requesting direct negotiations with humanity, bypassing the traditional council structure entirely. It was an unprecedented acknowledgement of Earth's new status. Dr. Webb and Ambassador Torres had spent weeks preparing for this moment, developing a framework for the negotiations that would determine the galaxy's future. They knew that humanity's demands would be seen as revolutionary by species that had lived under council rule for millennia. But the old system had proven itself incapable of change. The negotiations took place aboard a neutral station in deep space, far from any world that might claim territorial advantage. Sullivan led the human delegation, supported by representatives from the Rebel Alliance. Zethkar arrived with a small group of council species still willing to participate in diplomatic solutions. Humanity's demands were surprisingly moderate, given their military victories. They did not seek to dominate the galaxy or exact revenge for decades of oppression. Instead, they insisted on the complete dissolution of the current council structure and its replacement with a truly democratic federation where all species would have equal representation. The proposed federation would operate on principles that seemed radical to many alien species. Technology would be shared freely rather than hoarded by the powerful. Scientific research would be conducted cooperatively rather than competitively. Most importantly, no species would be forced to join or remain in the Federation against their will. Dr. Webb presented the technical framework for the new government, showing how improved communication technology could allow real democracy on a galactic scale. The universal translation systems that humanity had developed would enable direct communication between any species without the need for central processing. Servers, several council species, initially rejected the human proposals outright. The militaristic Kethmori saw democracy as weakness and preferred to continue fighting rather than accept equal status with species they considered inferior. The hierarchical Vorthons struggled to imagine a society without clear chains of command and authority. But the practical situation left them little choice. Captain Foster's intelligence networks and Dr. Carter's technological innovations had so thoroughly disrupted council operations that independent military action was nearly impossible. The species that refused to negotiate found themselves increasingly isolated and vulnerable. Zethkar found himself in the unexpected position of advocating for compromise among his own people. The proud Vorthon leader had begun to understand that the Council's authoritarian approach had created the very problems it claimed to solve. Oppression bred rebellion, and rebellion bred chaos that threatened everyone. The breakthrough came when Ambassador Torres suggested a transition period during which former Council species could observe the new Federation in action before deciding whether to join. This allowed proud alien leaders to save face while giving the democratic system time to prove its effectiveness. One by one, the remaining Council species agreed to the new framework. The Galactic Federation was formally established with its first democratically elected council, representing over 50 species. The diversity that had once been the Council's weakness became the Federation's greatest strength when properly coordinated. Admiral Sullivan faced intense pressure from many humans to accept the position of Supreme Commander or President of the new Federation. But she understood that human leadership of a supposedly democratic system would undermine everything they had fought to achieve. Instead, she accepted the role of Federation Defense Force Commander, Dr. Webb became the first director of interspecies scientific cooperation, leading efforts to share technology and research across the galaxy. The hoarding of knowledge that had characterized the Council era was replaced by open collaboration that accelerated scientific progress for all species. The new Federation's first major initiative was the establishment of rapid response teams to assist any member species facing natural disasters or external threats. These mixed species crews used the best technology from all Federation worlds, proving that cooperation could accomplish more than competition ever had. 3 years after the war's end, the galaxy was experiencing unprecedented peace and prosperity. Former enemies worked side by side on research projects and exploration missions. Trade flowed freely between worlds that had been isolated for centuries. The rigid caste system that had defined galactic society was gradually dissolving. New species regularly requested Federation membership, attracted by the promise of equality and mutual cooperation, rather than the fear that had motivated Council expansion. The Federation grew organically, welcoming anyone willing to embrace democratic principles while respecting those who preferred independence. Captain Foster continued his intelligence work, but now his network served to facilitate communication and trade, rather than coordinate military operations. The quantum communication systems that had once carried orders for rebellion now carried messages of friendship and cooperation between distant worlds. Dr. Carter's technological innovations found peaceful applications as her adaptive systems helped solve problems ranging from environmental restoration to interspecies communication barriers. The same creativity that had won the war now worked to build a better future for everyone in the galaxy. Even former enemies found places in the new order. Fleet Marshal Quindar, once the symbol of Council military might, became an advisor on defensive strategies for protecting Federation worlds from outside threats. His logical mind and military experience proved valuable when directed toward protection rather than oppression. Admiral Sullivan often stood at the same viewport where she had made the decision to resist the Council ultimatum years earlier. Earth still turned peacefully below, but now it was just one world among many in a galaxy where freedom and cooperation had replaced fear and domination. She reflected on humanity's remarkable journey from rejected primitives to respected leaders of galactic civilization. The greatest lesson of the war had not been about military tactics or technological innovation, but about the power of principles worth fighting for. The Council had expected Earth to surrender because they could not imagine any species choosing freedom over safety, dignity over survival. They had forgotten that some things were more important than mere existence. Humanity had reminded the galaxy that the natural order of the universe was not might makes right, but that all thinking beings deserved the chance to determine their own destiny among the stars.